The reconstruction domes of Valith Prime still hummed with the low thrum of atmospheric scrubbers 3 years after the armistice, a constant reminder that this world had nearly choked on its own poisoned skies before humans stepped in with filtration tech and stubborn engineering grit. Garrett Moss had been one of those engineers, not a hero in any flashy sense, just a man who knew how to reroute plasma conduits and recalibrate scrubber arrays under deadline pressure that would have broken lesser crews. He had arrived on a colonial contract, solved the bureaucratic knot that was delaying the final terraforming phase, and then when most of the human contingent rotated out, he stayed. Not out of some grand altruistic vision, but because the quiet suited him. The planet's violet twilight stretched long across the crystal plains. The air carried the faint metallic tang of recycled oxygen, and nobody asked him probing questions about why a 38-year-old structural specialist from New Seattle preferred solitude to the bustle of Earthside promotions. His residence was a modest hab unit on the edge of the New Harmony settlement, half buried in a hillside for thermal stability, its windows facing the hybrid garden he had planted as an experiment. Earth tomatoes tangled with Valith glowvines, potatoes sharing soil with nutrient-sensitive crystal ferns. Maintenance was supposed to be handled by automated drones, but the Valith Cultural Exchange Office had other ideas. Gratitude, they called it. Repayment for the lives saved during the reclamation. One morning a formal notice arrived on his terminal. Solara of the Third Bloom clan had volunteered for indefinite domestic assignment to his household. No negotiation. No opt-out clause. She arrived the same afternoon, stepping through the airlock with a single woven travel satchel and the kind of poised silence that made the room feel suddenly smaller. Her skin was the color of polished silver under the habitat lights, shifting subtly to deeper gunmetal hues when she moved. A chromatophore response that betrayed emotion even when her face remained composed. Pointed ears rose from hair the texture of spun moonlight, and her eyes were large, amber-flecked, set in a face that managed to look both delicate and unbreakable. She wore the standard service tunic of her people, loose, flowing fabric dyed in soft lichen greens, but carried herself with the straight-back dignity of someone who had once walked palace corridors rather than servant halls. Garrett had tried to protest. "I don't need help," he told the liaison over the comms link. "The drones handle everything." The liaison's reply was polite, firm, and final. "It is our custom." Refusal would be an insult to her honor and to the debt we owe. So Solara stayed. She moved through his home like water finding its level, silent except when necessary, her bare feet making no sound on the composite flooring. She prepared meals according to hybrid nutritional protocols, protein pastes flavored with Valith herbs for him, nutrient gels and fresh vine food for her self-cleaned surfaces that were already clean, tended the garden with a reverence that bordered on ritual. Garrett watched her from the corners of his eyes at first, uncomfortable with the dynamic. He had grown up in a city where labor was paid, contractual, detached. Having someone serve him felt archaic, almost exploitative. Yet she never complained, never indicated resentment. When he thanked her, she inclined her head slightly, silver skin flushing a brief rose gold at the cheeks, and murmured, "It is my duty, Coordinator Moss." He asked her once, early on, to call him Garrett. She tried once, Garrett, then reverted to titles, as if the informality bruised something inside her. Weeks turned into months. He worked long shifts at the central filtration hub, troubleshooting pressure valves and mentoring younger Valith technicians who still flinched at human bluntness. Home was a place to collapse, eat whatever she placed in front of him, and sleep. Solara became part of the rhythm. Tea waiting when he returned, garden lights dimmed to mimic earth dusk, his work boots cleaned and aligned by the door. He noticed small things. The way she lingered near the window during storms, watching lightning arc across the crystal fields with an expression he couldn't read. The way she arranged his tools on the workbench in perfect order, handles aligned, as though anticipating his next move. The way her skin shimmered brighter when he complimented the meal, a fleeting opalescent wave that vanished as quickly as it came. He told himself it was cultural. Valith expressed satisfaction through chromatophores. It meant nothing personal. Still, he began speaking more. Simple things at first. These glowvines are spreading faster than I expected. She would nod, reply softly. They respond to your voice, coordinator. The resonance calms their growth nodes. He learned she had studied xenobotany before the war, that her clan had once maintained vast orbital gardens feeding entire cities. The war had taken the gardens, poisoned the hydroponic cores, scattered her family. She never spoke of loss with bitterness, only quiet fact. Garrett shared fragments in return, his sister back on Earth raising twins, his father's old workshop where he first learned to weld, the way rain on Seattle streets smelled like possibility. Conversations remained surface level, polite, bounded by her deference and his awkwardness. Then came the night of the blackout. A plasma surge from an aging relay station plunged half the settlement into darkness. No alarms, just sudden silence where the scrubber's hum should have been. Garrett returned late, exhausted, covered in conduit grease. The HAB unit was lit only by emergency bioluminescence strips and the soft pulse of glowvines in the garden window. Solara had set a small table in the living area two-place settings, candles improvised from wax-coated nutrient pods, a simple meal of spiced root stew and flatbread. No words, she simply gestured for him to sit. They ate in the flickering light. For the first time the silence felt companionable rather than strained. He asked about her grandmother's garden, the one she sometimes mentioned in passing. Solara spoke haltingly at first, then with growing warmth. Terraces cascading down a mountainside. Blossoms that sang when touched. Irrigation channels carved by hand over generations. Garrett told her about his sister's kids, how the oldest had just built a model rocket that actually flew 3 meters before crashing into the neighbor's rosebush. They laughed quiet, surprised laughter that startled them both. The power returned at midnight. Lights flared on, scrubbers coughed back to life. Solara rose quickly, began clearing plates, cheeks flushed deep indigo with embarrassment. "Forgive the indulgence," she said. "I only wish to make the darkness less heavy." Garrett waved it off. It was nice, really. She paused, then inclined her head and retreated to her small quarters at the back of the HAB unit. He didn't think much of it afterward. A one-off, a moment of shared humanity or validity amid the blackout. Life resumed its rhythm. But 2 weeks later, after another 18-hour shift wrestling with a failing atmospheric exchanger, Garrett stumbled home bone-tired. Solara met him at the door as always, taking his coat, wordless. She had prepared dinner already, the scent of herb-braised protein drifting from the kitchen. He ate mechanically, mind still on pressure readings and fault logs. As he pushed back from the table, heading toward his sleeping pod, she spoke. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, the first time she had ever initiated beyond routine. "Coordinator Moss, Garrett. Can we do it again tonight?" He froze. The words hung in the air, innocent on the surface yet loaded with sudden, unexpected weight. His exhausted brain short-circuited, misfiring through every possible interpretation. Heat rose in his face. "Solara, She saw his expression, and her skin flooded crimson, a violent shift from silver to scarlet. Her ears flattened against her skull. "The dinner," she blurted. "The candles. The stories, like before, during the blackout." "I did not mean." She stopped, mortified, hands twisting in the hem of her tunic. Understanding crashed over him like cold water. Not that. Not what his tired mind had leaped to. Just companionship. A repeat of the simple human moment they had shared when the lights failed. He felt like an idiot. "Of course," he managed. "I'd like that." But she was already retreating, murmuring apologies, disappearing down the corridor to her quarters before he could say more. The door panel slid shut with a soft click. Garrett stood alone in the suddenly too bright kitchen, staring at the empty table, the candle she had not yet lit. For the first time he truly saw the care woven into every small act she performed. Not obligation, not duty, but something deliberate, personal, offered quietly over months without expectation of return. And he had been too wrapped in his own routines to notice. That night he lay awake in his pod, listening to the scrubber's steady drone, replaying every interaction in his mind. The way she watched him when she thought he wasn't looking. The rose-gold flush when he smiled. The garden tended with fingers that trembled slightly when he passed near. Solara wasn't just a servant assigned by bureaucracy. She never had been. And the realization settled over him slowly, heavily, like the violet dusk outside. He had been living beside someone who saw him, really saw him, while he had barely looked back. The violet dawn crept over the crystal plains the next morning with its usual slow reluctance, painting long shadows across the garden where glow vines still pulsed faintly from the night's residual energy. Garrett woke earlier than usual. The memory of Solara's flushed retreat and her hurried clarification, the dinner, the candles, the stories, looping through his mind like a stuck diagnostic loop. He lay in the sleeping pod staring at the ceiling panels, their soft luminescence shifting from cool blue to warm amber as the habitat mimicked sunrise, and tried to untangle the knot of emotions that had settled in his chest overnight. Embarrassment at his own misinterpretation was there, sharp and immediate, but beneath it lay something heavier, the dawning awareness that he had spent nearly 3 years treating her presence as background noise, a convenient constant rather than a person who had chosen to remain in his orbit, long after the debt of gratitude could reasonably be considered repaid. He rose, dressed in his standard work coveralls, and moved quietly through the hab unit. The kitchen was already immaculate, the table wiped clean, the unlit candle pods returned to their storage alcove. Solara's door remained sealed, the privacy indicator glowing a steady amber. She had not yet emerged for her morning routine. Garrett hesitated outside it, hand half raised as if to knock, then let it fall. What could he possibly say that wouldn't make the situation worse? Instead he brewed tea earth, black strong, the way he liked it, and carried 2 mugs to the small table by the garden window. When she finally appeared 20 minutes later, moving with the careful precision of someone trying not to draw attention, her skin had returned to its neutral silver, but the tips of her ears remained faintly rose-tinted. She paused at the sight of the second mug, amber eyes flicking to his face, then away. "Coordinator Moss," she began, voice softer than usual. Garrett cut her off gently, gesturing to the seat opposite. "Sit, please, just for a minute," she obeyed, folding herself into the chair with that same liquid grace, hands clasped tightly in her lap. The silence stretched long enough for the first sip of tea to cool on his tongue. He set the mug down. "Last night I misunderstood you," he said plainly. "My brain was fried from the shift and I jumped to the wrong conclusion. That was on me, not you. I'm sorry." Her ears lifted slightly, surprise flickering across her features before she schooled them back into composure. "There is no need for apology. I spoke carelessly." The words carried unintended weight in your language. She paused, studying the steam rising from her own untouched mug. "Among my people, to ask, 'Can we do it again tonight?' after sharing a moment of closeness is a ritual phrase. It means to repeat not merely the act, but the feeling, the quiet togetherness." "I did not consider how it might translate." Garrett nodded slowly. "I get that now. And I meant what I said. I'd like that. Not because I think I owe you anything, or because you're assigned here, but because it was nice, talking, not being alone in the dark." Her gaze lifted to meet his, searching, cautious. For the first time he noticed the faint golden flecks in her irises, catching the dawnlight like sparks. "You are not required to offer kindness to ease my discomfort," she said quietly. "I serve. That is enough." "No," he replied, firmer than he intended. "It isn't. Not anymore." The words surprised even him with their certainty. He leaned forward slightly. "You've been here almost 3 years, Solara. You've kept this place running smoother than any drone ever could. You've learned my routines, my moods, the way I like the garden lights angled so they don't glare on my terminal. You've done all of that without ever asking for anything in return." I think it's time I started paying attention back. She blinked, chromatophores rippling in a slow wave of pale lavender across her throat, a color he had never seen before, something between uncertainty and fragile hope. What would that mean? She asked. Garrett exhaled. It means we try something different. No more Coordinator Moss, just Garrett. No more retreating to your quarters the second the conversation gets personal. We eat together when I'm home. We really talk about whatever comes up. The blackout dinner wasn't a one-off. Let's make it regular. If you want that. She was silent for so long he thought he had overstepped. Then she reached out, hesitantly, and closed her fingers around the mug he had prepared for her. The ceramic warmed under her touch. Her skin shimmered briefly gold at the knuckles. I want that, she said, almost too quiet to hear. Very much. They drank in companionable quiet after that, watching the glow vines unfurl new buds as the artificial sun climbed higher. When it was time for him to leave for the filtration hub, she walked him to the airlock as always, but this time she didn't take his coat from the hook in advance. Instead, she stood closer than protocol demanded and said, "Be careful with the tertiary exchanger today." The pressure log showed microfluctuations last shift. He smiled despite himself. Noted. See you tonight? Tonight, she echoed, and the rose gold returned to her cheeks, softer this time, deliberate. The day at the hub passed in a blur of diagnostics and recalibrations, but Garrett's mind kept drifting back to that morning conversation. He caught himself smiling at nothing while rerouting a coolant line, earning a curious glance from the Valith Jr. tech beside him. By the time he returned home, the settlement lights were coming on in soft clusters across the plain, and the hab unit smelled of something new, something warm and spiced, not the usual nutrient-efficient stew. Solara had set the table properly this time. 2 place settings, fresh vine fruit sliced into translucent petals, flatbread warmed on the induction plate, and miraculously 2 small candle pods already flickering with pale blue flame. She looked up as he entered, ears rising in greeting. I thought. We could begin tonight, she said. No hesitation, no retreat. Garrett shrugged out of his coat, hung it himself, and crossed to the table. Good thought. They ate slowly, deliberately, letting the conversation wander. She told him about the orbital gardens again, this time describing the way the starlight filtered through the crystal lattice roofs and made every leaf glow from within. He told her about the time he and his sister had snuck onto the roof of their old apartment block during a rare clear night to watch a meteor shower, lying on their backs until the cold drove them inside. Neither story was especially dramatic, yet in the telling they felt intimate, shared secrets rather than polite anecdotes. When the meal ended, they did not rush to clear the plates. Instead, they moved to the garden window, sitting side by side on the low bench he had built from salvaged composite. Outside, the crystal fields reflected the settlement lights in fractured prisms. Solara's shoulder brushed his once, accidentally, then again, deliberately. Neither pulled away. I have a confession, she said after a long silence. When I was first assigned here, I expected duty, obligation. I did not expect this. She gestured vaguely between them. To be seen. Garrett turned his head to look at her profile, the elegant curve of her ear, the subtle play of light across her skin. I'm sorry it took me so long to start seeing. She shook her head. You were grieving your own solitude. I understood. I waited. The admission hung between them, simple and devastating. He reached out, tentative, and covered her hand where it rested on the bench. Her fingers were cool, smooth, trembling just slightly. She did not pull away. Instead, she turned her palm upward, lacing their fingers together with careful precision. The chromatophores along her wrist flared soft gold, then settled into a steady warm amber. They sat like that until the candles guttered low and the glow vines dimmed for the night cycle. When they finally rose to clear the table, working in easy tandem, Garrett felt something shift inside him, not dramatically, not all at once, but irrevocably. The hab unit no longer felt like a place he merely occupied. It felt like home. And the silver-skinned woman moving beside him no longer felt like a servant assigned by bureaucracy. She felt like someone who had chosen him, quietly, patiently, over and over again, until he finally chose her back. The weeks that followed the first intentional shared dinner unfolded like a slow recalibration of two orbits, finally acknowledging each other's gravity. Garrett found himself leaving the filtration hub earlier whenever possible, trading overtime shifts for the quiet anticipation of walking through the airlock to find Solara already waiting, not with bowed head and formal greeting, but with a small, private smile that made her amber eyes catch the habitat lights like polished citron. They established new routines without ever calling them that. Meals became longer, conversation less guarded, silences more comfortable than speech. She taught him the names of Valith constellations visible through the dome's observation, ports during clear nights, ancient patterns her people had once navigated by before orbital travel rendered star charts obsolete, and he showed her archive footage of Earth oceans, the way waves broke on black sand beaches near his childhood home, the sound of salt wind that no simulation could quite replicate. Physical distance shrank gradually, deliberately. A brush of shoulders at the garden window became lingering contact. Fingers that once met only when passing a dish now stayed entwined during quiet moments on the bench. Her chromatophores, once subtle indicators of mood he had barely noticed, now spoke to him in a private language he was learning to read. Soft gold for contentment, rose for affection, brief violet flickers when something touched old grief. One evening, after a particularly grueling day wrestling with a failing atmospheric recycler that had nearly vented half the hub's oxygen reserve, Garrett came home to find the lights dimmed low, the garden glowing brighter than usual. Solara had rearranged the low table so it faced the largest window. Two cushions woven from glowvine fibers she must have harvested and treated herself weighted side by side. No candles this time. Only the natural luminescence of the vines and the faint prismatic reflections from the crystal plane outside. She wore a different tunic, one he had never seen, deeper emerald threaded with silver filaments that caught the light like captured starlight, the fabric clinging more closely to her form than the standard service garments. When he stepped inside, she rose smoothly, crossed to him, and without preamble slid her arms around his waist in a careful embrace. Her forehead rested against his collarbone. She was tall enough that the position felt natural rather than forced. Garrett froze for half a heartbeat, then wrapped his arms around her in return, feeling the cool smoothness of her skin through the thin fabric, the faint tremor that ran through her frame. "You are safe," she murmured against his chest. The hub logs reported the incident. "I worried." The admission was raw, unguarded. He felt her ears flatten briefly against her skull before rising again. He tightened his hold. "I'm here. I'm okay." They stood like that until his heartbeat slowed to match the steady rhythm of the scrubbers outside. When they finally parted, she led him to the cushions, served a simple meal of vine fruit compote and warm flatbread infused with an herb that tasted faintly of cinnamon and ozone. They ate in near silence at first, the weight of the day still clinging to him, but gradually the tension eased. She asked quiet questions, how the failure started, what he had done to contain it, whether anyone had been hurt, and listened with complete attention, never interrupting, her hand resting lightly on his forearm. Afterward they moved to the bench as usual, but this time she did not sit beside him. Instead she turned, knelt gracefully before him on the low cushion, and took both his hands in hers. "Garrett," she said, using his name without title for what felt like the 100th time, yet still carried the same careful reverence. "There is something I must ask. Something my people do not speak of lightly." Her skin shimmered with nervous lavender waves. He nodded, throat suddenly tight. Among the Third Bloom clan, when two souls recognize compatibility, not mere attraction, but resonance, they perform the bloom sharing. It is intimate, not only physical. It binds memory fragments, allows each to feel echoes of the other's past joys and pains. It is permanent, irreversible without great cost. She paused, searching his face. I have felt our resonance growing since the blackout night, stronger each time we share closeness. I wish to offer it to you, if you will accept." Garrett's pulse thundered in his ears. He had known, on some level, that their connection was deepening beyond human norms, but this was a threshold he had not anticipated crossing so soon. He thought of the years of solitude before her arrival, the way he had armored himself against attachment after too many contract rotations and goodbyes. He thought of her patience, her quiet devotion, the way she had tended not just his home, but the parts of him he had long neglected. What would it feel like? He asked, voice rough. "For you, a gentle merging like dreaming together while awake. You would see fragments of my memories as I see yours. No secrets kept. No walls." She lifted one hand to trace the line of his jaw with cool fingertips. "It requires trust. Complete, and it would mark you to my people as mine, just as I would be marked as yours." He exhaled slowly. "I trust you, Solara. More than I've trusted anyone in a long time." Her eyes brightened, gold flaring bright along her cheekbones. She rose, drew him to his feet, and led him to the small alcove she had once used as private quarters, but which had stood empty since they began sharing the main sleeping pod on colder nights. The space had been transformed. Soft bioluminescent panels cast a gentle violet glow. Fresh glowvine cuttings twined along the walls in intricate patterns, and in the center lay a wide palette layered with fabrics that shimmered like liquid moonlight. She guided him down, knelt again, and pressed her palms to his fingers interlaced, foreheads touching. "Breathe with me," she whispered. He did. Inhale, exhale. The air between them warmed. Then came the first brush of something other, not physical sensation, but emotion, memory, flooding gently across the contact points. He saw flashes, vast orbital gardens under starlight, her grandmother's laughter as they tended glowing blossoms together. The cold silence after evacuation alarms sounded, and the gardens began to wither. Pain sharp enough to steal his breath, then softer things, curiosity, the first time she saw a human smile without calculation, wonder at the stubborn hope in Garrett's eyes when he talked about rebuilding. In return, he felt her receive his own echoes, childhood summers on rain-soaked rooftops, the ache of leaving Earth behind, the hollow quiet of too many empty apartments. Through it all ran a golden thread: recognition, belonging, the simple rightness of two people finding each other across species and stars. The merging deepened. Their breathing synchronized perfectly. When the final wave crested and receded, they were both trembling, tears on her cheeks catching the violet light like tiny prisms. She drew back just enough to look at him, eyes wide with awe. "You are so bright inside," she whispered. "So much light you keep hidden." He laughed shakily, brushed a tear from her face. "And you're the strongest person I've ever known." I felt it. Every scar, every garden you lost, and still you chose hope. They sank together onto the pallet, bodies curling into one another, her head on his chest, his arms around her waist, legs tangled without urgency, only closeness. The glowvines dimmed to a soft pulse, matching their slowing heartbeats. For the first time since the armistice, the universe felt small enough to hold just the two of them. Sleep came slowly, wrapped in shared warmth and the afterglow of merged memories. When morning arrived, violet dawn filtering through the window, neither moved to rise immediately. Solara traced idle patterns on his chest with one fingertip, silver skin now carrying a permanent, subtle golden undertone along her collarbones, a bloom mark, she had explained, visible to any Valith who looked closely. He caught her hand, kissed the inside of her wrist where the same faint gold shimmered on his own skin, faint but unmistakable. "No going back," he murmured. She smiled against his shoulder. "No wish to." Outside, the crystal plains glittered under the rising artificial sun. Scrubbers hummed their endless song, and the settlement continued its quiet recovery. Inside the Hab unit, two lives once kept carefully separate had woven together so tightly that the distinction no longer mattered. They were no longer coordinator and servant, human and Velith. They were simply Garrett and Solara bound, blooming, and at last no longer alone. The bloom sharing left an indelible mark, not only the faint golden shimmer that now traced subtle patterns along Garrett's wrists and collarbones, visible only under certain light or to those who knew to look, but a deeper, quiet certainty that reshaped every ordinary moment. Mornings no longer began with solitary coffee and terminal diagnostics. Instead, they unfolded in shared silence, broken by soft touches, Solara's fingers tracing the new marks on his skin as if memorizing them anew, his hand resting at the small of her back while she prepared their first meal of the day. The hab unit itself seemed to breathe differently, the air warmer, the glow vines more vibrant, as though the very atmosphere had absorbed some echo of their merged resonance. Work at the filtration hub continued, relentless as ever, but Garrett carried her presence with him now in small, grounding ways. The faint herbal scent that clung to his coveralls from her morning embrace, the memory fragments that surfaced unbidden during long shifts, her grandmother's laughter in blooming gardens, the cold terror of evacuation sirens serving as anchors when exhaustion threatened to pull him under. Colleagues noticed the change, though few understood it. A Velith technician named Lyrian, who had once served in the same reclamation crews as Solara's kin, caught sight of the golden tracery on Garrett's wrist during the toolbox handoff and froze, ears rising sharply. "You accepted the bloom?" she asked in a hushed tone that carried equal parts awe and concern. Garrett met her gaze steadily. She offered. "I accepted." Lyrian's chromatophores flared brief silver-white surprise before settling into warm amber approval. "Then you are clan now, in the old way." "Few humans ever are." The words lingered with him through the rest of the shift, not as burden but as belonging. When he returned home that evening, the settlement lights were already winking on across the crystal plains, twilight stretching violet and gold. Solara waited at the airlock threshold, not inside, but just beyond, wearing the emerald and silver tunic again, a small woven satchel slung across her shoulder. Her expression was calm, yet her ears betrayed a flicker of nervousness. "Walk with me?" she asked simply. He nodded, shrugging out of his coat and leaving it by the door. They stepped out together into the cooling air, the scrubber's hum fading behind them as they followed the winding path that led beyond the dome perimeter to the open crystal fields. The ground crunched softly underfoot, shards of translucent mineral catching the last light like scattered diamonds. Neither spoke for the first kilometer. There was no need. Their joined hands said enough, the steady pulse of warmth where skin met skin, the occasional brush of her thumb across his knuckles. At last they reached a low rise where the plane fell away toward distant reclamation towers, their silhouettes stark against the deepening sky. Solara stopped, turned to face him. "There is one final thing," she said. "The bloom sharing binds us, but my people have a tradition for those who cross stars and species. A naming." She reached into the satchel and withdrew a small crystal pendant, no larger than a thumbnail, faceted to catch every hue of the twilight. Inside, suspended in perfect clarity, floated a single preserved glow vine blossom, tiny, luminous, eternal. Among the third bloom, when two become one in this way, each receives a new name spoken only between them, a secret carried to the end of days. Mine for you is Veilther light that returns after eclipse. She placed the pendant around his neck. It settled warm against his skin, already matching his heartbeat. Garrett swallowed, throat tight. He had prepared nothing, yet the words came anyway, pulled from the place where her memories now lived inside him. "And for you, I choose Lirin Garden found after long winter." Her eyes widened, then shimmered with sudden moisture. She laughed a soft, startled sound and pressed her forehead to his. "It is perfect," she whispered. They stood there until full dark descended, stars piercing the dome overhead in patterns she had once taught him, the crystal fields glowing faintly with their own inner light. When they finally turned back toward the hab unit, the walk felt different, lighter, as though some last invisible weight had fallen away. Inside, The garden window framed a night sky streaked with auroral ribbons from the planet's weak magnetic field. Solara lit no candles. Instead, she dimmed the habitat lights until only the vines and the crystal reflections illuminated the room. They ate a late, simple supper at the low table, fruit, flatbread, spiced tea, talking of small futures rather than grand plans, perhaps expanding the garden to include more earth varieties, teaching any curious Veilith younglings about human welding techniques, visiting the orbital gardens when the next transport window opened so she could show him what remained of her clan's legacy. After the dishes were cleared, they moved to the sleeping alcove, no longer separate spaces, but one shared haven. She curled against him as always, head on his chest, one leg draped over his. But tonight her fingers found the pendant at his throat and traced its edges absently. "Do you ever regret staying?" she asked into the quiet. Garrett considered the question, not for the first time, but with new clarity. "I regretted leaving Earth at first. Regretted every contract that took me farther from anything familiar. But staying here, choosing this." He tightened his arm around her waist. "Never, not for a second." She lifted her head, amber eyes searching his in the dim glow. "Then we build forward. Together." He kissed her, then slow, deliberate, tasting the faint sweetness of vine fruit still on her lips, feeling the answering tremor that ran through her frame. The kiss deepened naturally, unhurried, clothes shed with the same quiet reverence they brought to every shared act. When their bodies finally joined, it was not mere physical union but continuation of the bloom memory and sensation, weaving together until the boundaries blurred completely. Her chromatophores flared in waves of gold and rose across her skin. His own borrowed marks shimmered in response. Afterward they lay tangled, breathing in sync, the scrubber's distant hum a lullaby. Sleep came wrapped in certainty. Months passed, then a full cycle of Veilith Prime's long seasons. The settlement grew, new filtration arrays online, more domes raised, hybrid gardens spreading beyond individual hab units into communal plots where human stubbornness met Veilith elegance. Garrett and Solara became a quiet fixture, he mentoring mixed crews at the hub, she tending the central vine arbors that now supplied half the settlement's fresh oxygen. Whispers followed them, not suspicion, but something closer to legend. "The human who bloomed," some said. "The third bloom daughter who chose a star wanderer," others replied. Neither paid the rumors much mind. Their life was built in private moments. Dawn teas by the window, late-night stories under auroras, hands clasped during long walks across the crystal fields. One evening, as another violet twilight settled over the plains, they stood again on the low rise where she had given him the pendant. The reclamation towers gleamed in the distance, proof of survival. Solara leaned into his side, head on his shoulder. "Look what we helped make," she murmured. Garrett followed her gaze, then turned to study her profile. The elegant ears, the silver skin now permanently kissed with gold, the quiet strength that had waited years for him to see it. "Look what we made," he corrected softly. She smiled, small and radiant. "Us." They stayed until the first stars appeared, two figures silhouetted against the glowing plain, human and Veilith, coordinator and gardener, exile and survivor, now simply two souls who had found each other when the universe least expected it. The scrubbers hummed on. The domes held. And in the quiet between heartbeats, their shared light burned steady against whatever darkness might come next.
Un guasón también, pero no he visto, güey. Hay un maestro Roshi. Pero, o sea, la neta
¿Cómo va eso? Compraste mucho. Conseguiste tus cartas y peluche.
Las cartas no, porque ando haciendo un quest. O sea, ¿qué significa quest? Misiones. O sea, me ponen a buscar misiones que... Misiones son como que, busca un güey con un sombrero gigante o así, cosas así.
Qué bueno.
Sí, sí, sí. No estoy haciendo tantas compras que digamos. Mira, hay otro 20. A la verga. Un póster, güey. De 12 por 18, 60 baros, cabrón.
¿Cómo vas con las quesos?
¿Con las qué? Con las pues bien, güey. Nomás que tomamos una pausa. Los pósteres se ven verga, güey.
Y te ganas.
Te dan como stickers. Estos
Y te
stickers.
dan cuando consigues todas las misiones.
Hay dos facciones, güey. Una facción es... una facción son los orcos y la otra facción son los elfos. Hoy estamos haciendo la facción de los orcos. Qué cosa tan verga de frame, güey, no mames, está perro. ¿Y León? ¿Qué León que tiene? Es que tiene que tener cicatrices visibles, güey.
La de elfos toca mañana.
Sí, la elfo la hacemos mañana. Tenemos que completar esta, güey. Completamos esta y hacemos mañana la otra. Ah, y de aquí te arreglan los cosplays, güey.
¿Has visto a ese tipo? Tenía una carta gigante del dios Cristo, el mago del tiempo, un reloj.
Ah, sí, era eso. Sí lo vi, pero no le presté mucha atención.
Qué buenos los cosplays.
Sí, está muy verga, güey.